Well, hey there, ho there, hi there. How's everybody doing today? Day after Christmas. Everybody's probably opened up their presents and got all kinds of cool stuff. And, you know, now you can make a mad dash to the store, back to Macy's, and turn that crap back in, get some money out of it maybe, I don't know, or repackage it and send it to somebody else. Oh, it's a wonderful time of the year. I'm sure there's a little bit of food left in the refrigerator, maybe some turkey and ham and stuff, and boy, that old stuffing, leftover stuffing, that's the best. Turkey and mashed potatoes, a little gravy on that. That's so good. That's probably the best part of all of this is that, even though friends are coming over and sometimes there's some, little disagreements, probably this time of year or at this particular time in history, there might be more disagreements than you can even imagine. I imagine some of you are maybe Trump supporters, and of course a lot of your family's not going to be. And you know what I find is interesting? Now, I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but if you take a poll, take a look at your individuals that say, oh, they hate Trump. They really don't like him. Just take a little, I don't mean you got to write this down or publish it anywhere or offend anybody and say anything about it, but I'm just saying a mental note here. Think about the people that don't like Trump. I know this is going to sound surprising, but I think you're going to find there are usually people that don't have as much common sense. They might, some of them actually be they have a high school diploma, or they've got a degree. So why would somebody with a degree be not as intelligent? Well, because those are the ones that are brainwashed. They've been to the schools of higher learning. They've gone through the courses of Kant and Sartre and Nietzsche and all of these. They've studied all the greats and they've gotten thoroughly confused. All of their professors and stuff are very liberal. And they want the utopia, right? They've been reading Plato's Utopia, Plato's Republic, right? Which is completely different from our Republic. If you read in there with Plato's Republic, you'll find he wanted to take the children away from their mothers. As soon as they were born, a mother never got to see the baby. All the children were raised by individuals that scored high on nursing. Because every child that's born, you watch them like in a little nursery, and if they have certain aptitudes, then you would put the ones that were artistic over here, the ones that had a scientific mind in this category. Some of them were more physically stronger. They ended up being construction workers or plumbers, right? Because they had the aptitude for plumbing. Maybe they were good with the Legos or the, building blocks or something. And some of the nurturers would end up nurses. You had no choice. You took a test. That's kind of funny. Because that's what we do now. We take tests to see what we're good at, to get our aptitude. And, we get into a certain field based on the test that we performed. Or it's really not about what do you want to be. It's really about what can I make the most money at, that I have the aptitude for, that somebody's going to hire me. It's kind of like that now. But anyway, it's a real doozy when you go back and start investigating what their ideal is. The philosophers used to sit around in the public square by the fountain, lounging around, perhaps drinking a spot of tea with the biscuit, and we've got to cover all the important industrial factors in consideration of your, details of your career, and we're going to put you in a particular spot. If you've got a round hole, you've got to put a round peg. It's the way it is. It's the way it is. Well, when you get that learned, you're really getting pretty stupid, because now you've lost all common sense. You're no longer able to think for yourself. Think about this. You go to college to learn to think like they want you to think. You don't go to college to learn to think. Now, I know a lot of you think, well, then that means that anybody that knows anything is really stupid. Well, that's not true. Because you see, it used to be that people who had learning, like Sir Isaac Newton and Galileo and Copernicus and Pasteur and all these individuals, back in the day, they didn't learn from some, accredited college or university that had some sort of agenda, like the Agenda 21, or like we're trying to form some sort of opinion for world takeover. It wasn't that at all. Sir Isaac Newton literally studied the occult writings. I know, don't get excited. I know he wasn't a Satan worshiper. He was studying the ancient hidden mysteries. And those books were from the ancient Egyptian library there in Alexandria. Of course, the Alexandrian library was destroyed in 295, but some of the books were taken down to Timbuktu in Africa. And up until the year 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, Spain was controlled by the Moors of Africa. And so they still had the freedom to learn. And this is where we get the Zohar and the Sefer Yetzirah, the Kabbalah, and all of this information, which led to this enlightenment in the European area up there. There was already a big enlightenment going on down there in the southern part, all the way around to the Arabian area and the eastern steppes and India and stuff. All of the enlightened ones lived outside of the Holy Roman Empire. And so Sir Isaac Newton and those individuals got their information not from some school that was authorized by the Jesuit priests of the Catholic Church, because those individuals had already been told what they were allowed to believe. They had a big council, a big meeting, and they said, okay, what are we going to believe? They didn't say, hey, what's the truth? They're going to say, what are we going to believe? How can we conform? How can everybody be controlled? What is it that we want that's going to be good for our government, for world power? We don't want people to know anything, so we got to keep them stupid. Let's keep it in the symbols, and we don't tell anybody the meaning of the symbols. We'll burn all the libraries. That should tell you something. They burned all the libraries. So they, if you got to pressure people to do what you want, then there's something's wrong there. They made edicts and anathemas. Oh, you are believing something that's against the doctrine of the church, so therefore you will be declared an apostate. They will issue a paper bull and an edict against you. You will have the inquisitors come out. They will come into to your home. They will question you. If you don't have all of the right answers immediately, and even if you do, if there's evidence that you're lying, which means that, they probably think you're lying no matter what you say, because they've already got some evidence that you've been teaching some sort of apostate doctrine, or else they wouldn't be there. Now, some of the signs they might note is if they came into your house and they saw a black cat. Oh, that's a sign that you've got demons. Maybe they saw, you had a wart on your nose. Anything like that. They had a certain litmus test that they could use as some kind of circumstantial evidence. Maybe there were pigs in the yard. Well, that was an indication that you had demons. So it would take you down to the local. Now remember, the dungeon was a place down below the castle where you couldn't be heard screaming. And that's where they would take you to question you, to interrogate you. Have you ever been a member of the occult? Well, that just means, have you ever studied the ancient wisdom? Do you know anything? Do you know the truth? And if you said, well, no, See, they already know you did. They wouldn't have you down there. So then they'd start pulling your fingers off, or maybe your fingernails to start with, and then they'd graduate up to fingers, and then, it goes on from there. If you refuse to recant, you have to admit what you did, you had to recant, you could recant and then pay some penance. In other words, if you had money, you could get out of the situation. Oh, I've got millions of dollars, no problem, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. Okay, just give us all your money and say, holy, 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 50,000 times on your rosary bead, and do some public penance and walk around and, tell everybody you're sorry and the church is correct and you were wrong, and issue a statement that you're wrong. Issue an apology like they're doing today in the media. Like, oh, I said I wore blackface back in 1930. I was going to a costume party and I looked like Michael Jackson. So now I've got an issue, an apology, and that might not be good enough, right? But anyway, if you recanted enough, sometimes, or if you were important enough or had enough money, sometimes they'd let you go. They wouldn't just murder you. But there were individuals down there in Spain before 1492 that were free to study this ancient wisdom. Sir Isaac Newton translated the Emerald Tablets. He was very, very, he was an in-depth, and he knew very clearly the ancient scriptures. He was studying the book of Daniel. He had determined that the end of the next age, at the time of the coming of the new age, would be the year 2060, which is actually coming up pretty soon. Now, that may not be the right date, of course. I doubt, because nobody knows the day and the hour. He got that from the book of Daniel. But, it's interesting because I think he's pretty close, which is pretty odd because everyone else for hundreds of years have been always giving some date in the near future, like in the day they lived, because they somehow wanted it so much that the world would come to an end, and all these religions would start up, and it was always, if they lived in the year 1820, they thought the world was coming to an end in 1825 or something. It was always around the corner, Hal Lindsey thought it was 1980s or something, and that didn't happen, but, you didn't see any of the fundamentalists apologize for that one. They just simply put that book on back order and let it go out of print. And, most people have never heard of it now. It's forgotten. We move on. But Sir Isaac Newton was a genius. He was literally very, very intelligent. Some of the information that he came up with, we're still using. All of it. We're still basically using all of his information. And I'm going to get into some of that in an upcoming video. Very soon we're going to be talking about gravity. And, I've decided to go all out, balls to the walls, completely explain in in-depth language, clearly, from the beginning to the end, from Pythagoras, from the Egyptian priesthood to Pythagoras to Aristotle, Plato, to Sir Isaac Newton, well, Ptolemy and Copernicus, Galileo and Sir Isaac Newton, on down to some of the individuals like Kierkegaard and Heidegger and these individuals, how this information came to us, whether it's based on anything real or speculation or whether they were right or wrong. I guarantee that the stuff that Sir Isaac Newton came up with is more than brilliant. You can prove that everything he said was the truth. Now, I'm not saying he never made a mistake, but, stuff like the laws of physics. I mean, they had some laws of physics before that. Kepler had talked about some things, and Copernicus had some rules and laws that they were kind of going by, but laws took time to establish. There were certain theories that sometimes they played with and they had little variations. But basically, science is very, very, very... The science we have is based on a foundation that's really true. Einsteinian physics is true. And I know a lot of you doubt it and you're skeptical, but I'm going to be able to show you how this stuff called calculus is real. Math is something very simple. Most of us can understand. 2 and 2 is 4. We can verify it. We can get 2 nuts in one hand and put 2 nuts in the other hand. I don't know what you're doing with nuts in your hand, but anyway, and you see the 2, and then you hold them up in front of your eyes and open your hands, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, verified. 2 and 2 is 4. You can extrapolate from that 8 and 8 is 16. It's very simple. But at some point, you're going to get to numbers that you can't, remember. So you have to develop kind of higher math so that you can like carry the 1 and bring down the 3, and and you have a system so you can expand knowledge, because you can't remember all of this in your head. So this is what they did. They expanded on one point after the other. They kept expanding. They began to question, well, what causes the earth to go around the sun? Or do we go around the sun actually? And how can we determine, how can we prove that the earth is actually a sphere? Friends, I'm going to show you that you can prove it. I mean, most any real scientist could prove to you, but there's an art to teaching, and to be able to sit down and explain it in a way that is simple for people who don't know calculus or anything, it's a little tricky. And I'll guarantee you that one of the reasons is that some of the people have this higher education at this point no longer know why it's true. And to be honest with you, they may not even know if it is. They're just repeating something like a parrot. Well, E equals MC squared, and I'll show you on this chalkboard. E over here, and you make a little mark here, and a little dash there, and whip down, carry the 1, lower the 3, and scratch out the, it's just, they're repeating stuff. They don't really know. Now, not every scientist is ignorant. I mean, most scientists that have gotten that far have thought about things a little bit. But, it's kind of like memorization tests. They just memorize what they're supposed to do, and they do it on paper, and they may be an engineer. And, that's a pretty intelligent person who's an engineer. It works. They end up coming up with metal that won't melt at a certain point, and they have to know these certain formulas and, pressures and how much mass does it take to, So back in the days of Newton, he developed certain basic laws that we still go by today, and they're very, very interesting. And they explain the universe in a way that if you were to start with the premises that Newton had, and you got to where you could literally understand them, it's not that hard, because there's just a few of these basic laws. It starts with stuff like something that's moving in a direction will continue in the same direction at the same velocity and the same speed until acted upon by another force. And they used this then they demonstrated whether it was true. And they came up with things like velocity, speed, equilibrium, centrifugal force. You see, gravity is a product of centrifugal force. And what they did was they determined, now, I can't prove all of this to you in a minute, but we're going to do this in another video. But it's basically a formula that goes something like this. Depending on the mass of your object, because according to Newton, everything in the universe attracts. Now, that's about as far, everything's attracting. So the sun being bigger, the earth is being attracted to the sun. And he had a formula whereby the mass of the earth would be compared to the mass of the sun, and the distance between the center of the earth to the distance of the center of the sun was squared by the mass of each of the objects, and you could determine the amount or the force of the gravity. So we won't get into that real deep here, but what I'm saying is that these are mathematical formulas, and it always works. You can demonstrate it. And they determined it. You can see the force of gravity. You can put a rock in the air and drop it, and measure the speed in which it falls. And then you can carry this to infinitum on different, it's just like we said, if you can figure out what 2 and 2 is 4, then you can imagine that 1,000,000 times 1,000,000 is a trillion, and simply because you carry the zeros, it's a mathematical, it always works. So we're going to show that all of this is correct, and we're going to be able to show from this why the Earth is a sphere. Now I'll give you just a little hint. We're not going to get into this very deep. Now don't get all excited and scared and upset and angry with me and give me a bunch of angry comments in the bottom, because this isn't in depth. This is just a little point, just a little teaser to show you what kind of stuff we're going to learn. But for instance, just based on the fact that when you look up into the sky, you see the moon, and you always see one side of the moon. Now, why would that be? Observation. Why is it that you always see one side of the moon and not the other side? What would cause a huge rock 2,000 feet through the diameter, over 2,000 miles, excuse me? That's a big rock. The Earth is 8,000 miles through the diameter. 8,000 miles thick. 24,000 miles around. Remember that, 24,000. Because that's interesting, because there's, it fits with the 360 degrees of the circle. And we break it up into 12 hours and 12 hours of night, and there's 24. And so it's interesting that there are 24,000 miles in distance around the Earth. But back to the point. So we have these two huge rocks. Now, imagine that they're spheres for a moment. We look up at the moon, you can see it's a sphere. Yes, you can see it's a sphere. Because on certain nights, you see a crescent moon, and you can see the shadow. You can see right where the crescent stops. It doesn't just stop. You can still see some of the moon as it goes around, and you can see as it shades around that it's round, that it's shining. The sun is reflecting off of it, a round ball. You can see that. You can observe it, and you get a telescope, and you can observe it much better. You can see the backside of the moon. It's not really the backside, but I mean the darker side when it's a crescent with a telescope, and you can see that it's round. Well, because of the curvature of the way that the crescent, the light is shining on it, it has to be concave. Well, we can also see with telescopes Mars and Venus, Jupiter, Saturn. Same thing. Now, why then would this huge big rock always be facing? We know that something's spinning or revolving or moving, because the moon comes up and goes around and goes down. It arises and falls. It sets. You get a moon set and a moon rise. And it changes. Okay? Sometimes it's a full moon, sometimes it's a new moon, sometimes it's a crescent or whatever. Or a half moon. And so we can see that it doesn't go around exactly. Somehow there's a wobble or there's a variation there. You got to figure all that in mathematically, and through that you can understand quite a bit about the motions that are going on there. But ask yourself why it's always facing. If it's that big of a rock and it's moving around like that, either we're moving, spinning, then if there's a force, like, say, centrifugal force, the Earth is spinning real fast, then why doesn't everything just fly off the Earth? Right? Well, this is what we're going to get into in coming videos. It's too complicated to get into all of this right now, but because of the distance between the moon and the Earth, gravity lessens as you get further out away from the Earth. But if you're a really big heavy rock like the moon, see, Newton did a sort of an experiment, sort of a mental experiment. He didn't do an actual fact. He just wrote it on paper. Gave an example of a cannonball. You shoot a cannonball in the air. Now, if you shoot the cannonball in the air and it's not going very fast, to exceed the weight or the mass, then it's going to go up in the air and go right down to the ground. Okay? Because it's too heavy. It's got too much mass. It's too heavy. So it's not going to go very far. Right? If it's a small rock, it might go a lot further. If you're going to shoot this huge, heavy iron ball, it's so heavy, it'll go bloop right onto the ground. However, if you increase the speed, the force behind the ball, you put more powder in the ball, shoot it with more velocity and speed, it'll go further. We all know that's a fact. We can measure the arc, how fast it goes to the ground. We can continue to do this. We can make it go faster and faster and shoot it with more force, and it'll go further. There comes a point in this equation where you shoot it fast enough that it reaches a certain velocity where it stays in orbit. If you can get that thing up into the air to a certain point, and the speed will exceed the mass, it'll go around and around and begin to orbit. But it has to be at a certain mass to do that and a certain speed. If it slows down at all, remember, everything will continue to move in the same direction until acted upon by another force. So the cannonball is being acted upon by the force of the Earth and its mass and its gravitational force. But it's also being acted upon by another force, which is the speed or the power that you pushed it out in the air. If that exceeds the mass and the pull of gravity, it'll continue to rotate. So he had all these formulas and he demonstrated this, and they proved all of this stuff. And I know you don't believe it because you haven't seen it for yourself. But if you do a little research, you'll find that they did enough investigations over the last several hundred years. They figured this out. They've proven it. They've demonstrated it. And they've verified that all of these equations and stuff that they came up with were true. Now, again, imagine then that the moon has a certain mass, is at a certain distance from the Earth, and it's rotating because of some kind of centrifugal force. But there are other forces working. Remember that, which we're not going to get into in this video. But there are other forces as to why it's doing it. But for the purpose of this video, we're just going to be concentrating on centrifugal force. Now, what is that? Say you have a bucket with a handle. You put half a bucket of water. Okay, you don't fill it all the way up, but just put half the bucket of water. Pick it up by the handle and start swinging it slowly around you so you don't lose any water, because if you just dump the bucket over, the water will come out. But if you start moving it in a circle, like swinging from the handle, you'll notice that you can reach a certain speed. If you don't go very fast, the water will come out. But if you go faster, the water will be acted upon by the force of centrifugal force. And the water will be propelled to the back of the bucket. And it won't come out. The water will stay there. So if there's an orbit and there's a mass, the Earth has a certain mass and a certain gravitational pull. And the moon itself has a certain gravitational pull. And the sun has a certain gravitational pull. And there's all of these forces working. Then each of the forces counteract each other. Scientists had to discover which of these forces were acting. Sometimes, at first, they didn't know all of the forces. They didn't understand centrifugal force, or they didn't understand mass. They saw something the same size, but one fell to the ground faster. They figured out, same size, but not the same mass. See, these are a lot of things that you're not thinking about, that you haven't done hundreds of years of study on. Each of these scientists coming after the other and going back over the other person's work and adding to it sometimes disproving certain parts of it until they clarified and verified all of it. We still haven't verified everything, but we have proven just about everything that Newton said about his laws of physics are true. So why does the Earth always stay with facing the Earth? The moon, I mean? Because the moon is one of the reasons the moon is going around and around is centrifugal force. Remember, we're only seeing the Earth in its physical form. There's a lot of things out there that you can't see with your eyes. Certain vibrations and ultraviolet light, you can't see it, but it's still there. It's still a wavelength, just like the mass is a wavelength. All matter is essentially just a wavelength. It's not physical. So what you see with your eyes is just the form that it takes as Earth. But if you had different eyes, you could see that the Earth is much bigger. Look at Saturn. There's one big ball, but around it is these rings. What are the rings? Well, that's part of Saturn, but that's the gaseous part. And it forms a ring because of centrifugal force. As it's spinning, it shoots the gases out there, and it spins, and it forms this ring. As time goes on and the gases begin to form more mass. Now, how does this happen? We're not discussing that in this video. I know you got a lot of questions. Well, how does that happen? Well, over time, for reasons of cooling and, certain evaporation, different things like that, you're left with just harder, more elemental parts to the ring. When it develops enough solidity to form an actual form, a physical form, it always develops a round ball. Why would that be? Well, take any top and spin it, and you'll see that it cannot be a perfect spin, an absolute perfect round circle. Never. There's always going to be some other force that's acting upon it, an opposite reaction. And therefore it's going to start wobbling because of that other force. There's a little grain of sand that's causing this little wobble. It's a little heavier on one side, okay? And if it's a little heavier on one side, it's going to start wobbling. And if you could see that over a period of time as it wobbles, you'd see that it makes a form, a vibrational form. Now, everything's going to have its own pattern. Every planet's going to have different rings or a different number of moons or a different wobble, a different speed, a different velocity, a different mass. All of these things are going to be taken into consideration. You need a computer for some of this. But if it's wobbling just a little, and everything always is, okay, then all of that mass that's in that ring eventually forms into some mass, and it'll have to form a round ball on one side of the planet. It's not going to be a tube all the way around the planet, like the ring is all the way around, but when it forms, it makes a round ball because of centrifugal force. All of the particles are going to come together in a ball on one side of the planet. The moon's going to form onto one side of the planet into a ball, simply because of centrifugal force. It's pushing all of the mass and the weight to the side that's wobbling to that vibration, that is pushing it to that side. All right? I don't know if I've explained that very well, but I'll try one more time real quick because I want you to catch this before we move on. So the planet like Saturn has got rings. Over time, it solidifies until it wants to make a form or a planet. Why does it form a planet and not just a hard ring, like a massive, why wouldn't it just all, the gravity just suck it into the planet and it becomes part of the planet? Well, parts of it does. Certain elements will go to the planet, perhaps. But as we said, if it's going at a certain speed, and if you get close enough to the planet, it may through velocity or viscosity and certain other laws that we can't get into now, it may get sucked into the planet and go to the surface, like static electricity. But if you get far enough outside of the planet, just like a hurricane, it's going to be throwing things away. It's going to be pushing. There's a certain place somewhere around that planet where it will either repel and depending on what it's made out of. It could be, like, for instance, on the Earth, the air goes up, but, you know, uranium goes down. It depends on what elements are involved and things like that. So lots of things to take into consideration. But this gas forms a planet. The planet turns into a ball and revolves around the planet in one particular ball because there's a wobble in the spin. And so everything, all of that ring is going to form into one mass. And when it combines and makes this mass, it's going to look like a planet. It's going to form a perfectly round ball. Just like a raindrop, when it falls from the sky, forms into a little round ball. Just simply forces of physical forces that causes these things. Now, if it's spinning around the Earth because of centrifugal force, then the heaviest part of the moon, just like the gases form on one side of the planet to make a moon, so too, one side of the moon being a little heavier is always going to face away from the planet. And the lightest part of that moon is going to face towards the planet. Because no moon, no rock, right, that's going to orbit any planet is going to be perfectly round and the same mass and weight on all sides. If it were perfectly round, it might orbit a little bit. It might spin because there's no, you know, like if, for instance, if you had a top that was put on a lathe and made perfectly balanced, you could sit there and spin forever. But if you make a little bit heavier on one side of the top that you spin, that little toy that kids have, and it's a little heavier on one side, maybe you put some tape and you put a penny on one side and then you spin it. Well, it'll spin pretty good for a minute and then it'll start wobbling and then it'll fall down because of that imbalance. Well, every sphere in nature usually has an imbalance. This is what makes flowers. That little vortex comes up and makes the petals. Certain design, a certain vibration. Everything has its own vibration. A little bit of a wobble. 6 sides, 8 sides, 9 sides, 100 sides, whatever. There's a certain beautiful little vibration that's you. That's your own DNA. DNA is a little round, corkscrew type of wobble. Flowers, gems, diamonds, rubies. Everything has its own little DNA. Its own perfect little beauty. Every planet has this little spin. Number of planets, a number of gases, or whatever it has. Maybe it has water, maybe it doesn't, maybe it has air. It's all unique because of the vibrations and the spin and the rotation and the laws of physics. But the moon, because it's not perfectly, absolutely round, and you can see that when you look at the moon, the side that faces Earth is all pockmarked with these huge, what we call craters. Well, if you were on the moon, you'd see it's not really craters. They're probably volcanoes. They're big holes, volcanic. If you go to Google Moon and put your mouse on some of those dark areas, you'll see that they're deep, deep, deep ravines. And if you look on the circles, the little round craters, those are higher. Those are mountains, and they go down, and they at the bottom of the circle around it is a big area which is very low. It's almost like there's a big ocean. There once was a big, deep, area where if you had water, the water might fill in that area. But the moon is lighter and it's heavier on the other side. Now, go to Google Moon and check the elevation on this side of the moon. You'll see that it's lower, deep. Check the other side of the moon. You'll see it's much higher, high plateaus. There's more mass on the other side of the moon. That's why it's facing the other way. It is a scientific thing, friends. So we have just basically gone into this very, 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 it's just preliminary ideas here I'm throwing out for you. We're going to eventually prove to some of you who just don't understand why we have to know, or why we do know, that the Earth is round. But that is one of the reasons, because of the centrifugal force, because of the forces, the physical laws that we see going on. We can calculate with math and calculus, geometry. We can find out that the Earth is definitely got to be spinning and making some kind of a centrifugal force which is causing the moon to go around and around and always face away from the earth. Or the one face towards us is always there because of these particular laws that we have carefully throughout the many years. We put all this together and we figured this out. So I think I'll leave it there on the science base of it. But just to kind of conclude this particular video, and I'm not going to say this is going to be a series. I'm not going to put 1, 2, and 3, but I think some of the videos we're going to be doing over the next few weeks is going to be about this subject. And we're going to get to the absolute truth, absolute bottom. We're going to try and explain it so clearly and precisely that everybody will understand, and it'll be like, whoa, wow. But I must admit that in the days of Sir Isaac Newton, when he figured this out, he used his spiritual intuition. He studied the ancient wisdom. He came to these conclusions based on the Emerald Tablets and the Bible, the ancient esoteric wisdom. Looking at the ancient symbols, oh, it's there, right? Jesus said, go out a little further in the boat. They couldn't catch any fish on that side of the boat. So they threw their net on the other side, and they got 193 fishes, 200 feet from the shore. Well, that's a Pythagorean geometrical formula. Look it up. The Bible is full of science. And you can prove that the earth is a sphere. And we will do that, God willing. And we're going to show all of this that people today don't know anything about, because now people in university are studying Newton. They don't know where he got this information. They're never told, oh, go study the esoteric wisdom that he studied. Go look at the Emerald Tablets. They don't do that. All they do is look at his conclusions. It's just a bunch of math. They don't know how he got this information. Pythagoras invented geometry. Right. No, he studied the esoteric wisdom, just like Sir Isaac Newton. And it's real, friends. The people in the higher learning in the universities today aren't allowed to do that. So they don't know why they came to the conclusions. They just know this is science. And they know that the figures work. Oh, I know calculus. This seems to work. But they don't know why or where he got the inspiration. Friends, the inspiration is in the esoteric wisdom. That's where I'm getting it. I didn't go to university. I didn't learn physics in a classroom. I didn't get a degree. You don't need that. That's not even important, all these actual figures and facts and stuff. What's really important is the fact that when you grasp the universe, you know what it is. You know where we are. You know what's going on. Who you are. You're not a physical being. And then you understand what time is. You got to know that to know who you are, because if you think time is a reality and space is a reality, then you wonder, okay, I am some kind of physical thing? Well, then you don't know who you are, because that's not what you are. Because you're always going through time. So time changes space. So if space is always changing, it's not reality. It's just an illusion. So you wouldn't know who you are if you thought in terms of this carnal mind. So you got to get behind the physics to understand who you are. Now, if you know what the universe is, if you understand what electricity is, right? It's just this, it's hot and cold coming together. Heat rises. See, what is hot? Hot is warm, life, living, existence. What is cold? Death, no life, nothing. So what is it? That which is and that which is not. Well, how come there's that which exists? Why does anything exist? Because if you have a left, by definition, you have a right. If you have an up, by definition, you have a down. If you have something that exists, you have something that does not exist. You cannot say that exists if there isn't something that doesn't exist. The very fact that you say, well, what if nothing exists, Dave? What if there's nothing? No thing. Well, to conceive of nothing, you have to conceive of something. So the two things have to be conceivable. This is why we have 0 in our math. And then we have 1. And then 2. And 3. And 4. And 5. And we get to 9 and we go back to 1 again. Why? Because then you can go to 10 and put a 1 behind the 1. A 1 and a 1. You can only think of 10 at a time, and then you got to double it. Your mind has to have a way, a pattern, a way to understand. It's just symbols. But what it's really saying is there's that which is and there's that which is not. And that which is can be divided into infinity. So you can add zeros behind the 1 forever. That's all there is. Just math. So what does math tell you? Wow, it's a symbol to explain who you are. You are something that exists. What is what exists? What is the I am? That's what we want to learn. That's what you need to know. That's what you're craving to understand. Do I exist? But you're thinking, will I exist tomorrow? If I don't exist tomorrow, what's the point? For tomorrow we shall all die. Live and be merry. Drink it up. Right? You're going to die anyway. No. That's not the truth. That's a very foolish person, according to Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes. He pursued wisdom and he pursued folly. So, once you grasp that you're not something that is, that time has no application upon you, you are outside of time. Time is something that is just a variable of the one. Time can be slowed down. You can take time. If time's a number, then you can add zeros behind the 1 or in front of the 1. Infinitely, in the future or in the past. Up or in down, in or in out. That one, the one being, God, can be divided into all of his children infinitely. We all exist in reality by virtue of our existence, not because somebody created us, but by virtue of our own being. We're immortal beings, all of us. When you learn that you're immortal and you cannot die, E equals MC squared, that matter is transformed to energy and energy back into matter, the form has nothing to do with what you are. Time has nothing to do with it. Do you exist now? Touch yourself. Look, you exist. If you do exist now, you will always exist because there is no time and space. You exist by virtue of yourself. It has nothing to do with all of the variables or the various temporal modes you may go into. Perhaps one day you comb your hair back, another day you comb it to the front. That's still you. When I was 9 and I knew very little, and I was playing on a pine tree and behind my house, and skipping rocks and playing in the water and swimming and doing all these things and playing with my dog, that was me, right? Well then, who am I now? Because I'm totally different now. I look different. I have a different body. Every cell in my body's been replaced. I don't think the same. I don't want the same things. I don't, it's crazy. I can barely remember that old boy. But I'm still me. But the form has nothing to do with who I am. So if I were to perish now, it would only be an illusion. Because the only thing that really exists is me. And I am simply one variable of the all. And the all exists, and all the variables exist. That's what we want to get into. That's the real crux of the matter. That's what Newton was really studying. All of this science and physical calculus and all that stuff was just, superfluous. It's just facts that get in the way, right? You can use it as a tool to understand who you are. Not to build bombs so we can win wars. Not to build technological advancements so we can put satellites in the air and control everybody. Manipulate all of this to control. That's what the elite are doing today, and they don't want people in the university to know the reasons and where Newton got this information. They don't want you to know. You go to university and still come out of there thinking that there is no God. Why? Because Darwin didn't know? Darwin believed in God. Freud did. Einstein did. But they don't tell you that. Because there were individuals like Nietzsche and so forth that said, hey, God is dead. Because when the Catholic Church burned all of the books and murdered all of the saints and got rid of all the knowledge, they had to start over again. But Ptolemy had to sit down and go back and try to find some of these ancient books and put it all back together again. He didn't quite get it all together. Then people came along like Copernicus and they said, well, I think I understand. And how about this, how about that? And they redid everything. Then we came down to Newton, who was one smart cookie. He had to know a lot more than what we're being told, because in order to invent all of the science, math, he had to have known something much, much deeper, which is what you and I are going to find out in the next few videos that we're going to be doing about knowing for certain who we really are, how we really exist. You know, it's a beautiful thing. I'm really, really excited about doing the next few videos. There's probably going to be other videos, and you know, I wake up each day and decide, I'm going to do a video about this or that. It's Christmas time. We'll do a video about Christmas or something. So, you know, like I say, I'm not going to be a series where it's like 1, part 2, part 3. But this is some of the stuff that we're going to be getting into in the future. We want to... So I encourage you to watch these videos. Sometimes they're a little boring. And I start off talking about, you know, weird things that you might not think is related to what we're talking about. But really, it's a foundation to build so that your mind can begin to understand and grasp what we're about to get into. So this video is more or less a platform to get yourself to a place where you can say, wait a minute now, I see what he's saying. Perhaps this is going to lead to an understanding, not really about whether the earth is round, okay? That's beyond what that's not the important thing, where we live on a flat earth or a round earth. But it is important to know the facts. We do happen to live on a sphere, and there's a reason for that. It's the physics that govern all by virtue of the one, which is you. And everything surrounds and revolves around you, not the sun, and nothing revolves around the sun, nothing revolves around the earth, but it all revolves around God. And God is in the temple, and the temple is the universe. But there's no center physically in the universe. It's simply the source of the physical. Your mind. When you can develop an absolute faith based on a great deal of knowledge and experimentation, you learn by the things in which you suffer. You also learn by your experimentations. And once you exercise your faith, you try it out. You know, you don't know. You plant a seed. We don't know if it's going to grow. You have faith it's going to grow. You put the seed in the ground. You go away. You go to bed. Wake up in the morning. Oh, it sprouts. Well, you didn't cause it to sprout. There's just things that happen regardless of whether you believe it or not. But if you want to be able to exploit those truths and know and understand, oh, now I know that if I plant seeds, I can make a garden. If I water it, make sure it gets water and sunshine, it's going to grow. Oh, man. So this is what science is. So if we can figure out who we are and what's causing all these problems in our lives, that it's all coming from within us, there is no punitive judgments in the world. You don't suffer because God's angry with you. That's superstition, my friends. That's witchcraft. Although there are no such thing as witches. Witches just means wise women, and wizards mean wise men, as we've said many times, and there were plenty of those. But I'm talking about the storybook, the goblins and the ghosts. That's baloney. Trust me, you're going to figure out as you go that there's a lot of things, like throwing salt over your shoulder doesn't work. And you don't got to be scared of black cats. And when you're sick, you don't let some weirdo lay you down on a stone slab and slit your wrist and bleed out and put leeches in it, and that's somehow going to cure you. You know, you got to get rid of the demons and do some, get some holy water, right? And all this stuff is just superstition. The fact that you're being judged by an angry God is a superstition. And you must eradicate that thinking from your mind. You must have confidence in yourself and know who you are, or you're never going to make it in anything you ever do. If you don't believe in yourself, you will never get anywhere, because everything that you're doing and thinking, you're manifesting. This is what we're really trying to do, is manifest who we are inside. Who are you inside? Well, inside you are laying by a cool brook, and there's a deer and a fawn, and there's a beautiful fruit waiting to be plucked at your leisure. There's marble road leading to your palace. You've got palm trees lining the path. Perhaps your floor's made out of solid marble and your ceiling's made out of solid gold. Oh, Dave, why, that's ridiculous. You're a materialist. No, a materialist is one who sits around worrying and wishing he had those things. And he develops a rash because he's so scared because he don't got it. Because he thinks he don't deserve it because he has no confidence. That's a materialist. Who's lusting. It's a cheap lust. And that lust is going to only bring to you the fears that you imagine. But if you believe and have confidence that that's who you are, then that's who you are. It shall be according to your faith, Jesus said. Well, Jesus, if you can you heal me? If I can, everything is possible for those who have faith. Do you believe this? If you don't believe it, you're simply ignorant. You don't know the facts. You've got to... Sir Isaac Newton was not studying physics. He didn't give a flying leap about calculus or how smart he was, or whatever, if he got a degree or, he only wanted to know who he was, what the universe was, how he could live and be happy and succeed. Do you want to succeed? You can. There's a way. We're at the finish line. We got this. We can figure this out. Follow me in the next few videos, because we're going to go from one step to the next, and we're going to establish the reality that is real. And we're going to find out that what is real isn't some fixed thing. You can look at something and make a picture, and that's just an illusion. The only thing that's real is whatever you want. The reality is that you are, if you read Heidegger, he talks about how you are more or less the being. And the being, or the Dasein, he called it, which is German for the presence, being present in the situation. You're not a thing. You're the presence. You're the consciousness. And when you see other things, there could be what he calls equipment. And then there are tools. That's an equipment. This is tools. You see other people, and they're all doing something or another. If you're a weak Dasein, if you're not really present as yourself, then you are being taken over by other entities, and you're only doing what they're doing. You're not a true self. You've got much to learn. You're just a child under a tutor until the time arrives when you will become the heir. If you want to be a true Dasein, a true being who is present, not in the future with his dreams or in the past with his emotions and his fears, but in the present and confident, you will see the others. You will analyze what they're doing, whether or not they're doing anything you like or not like. You'll take what you want out of everything around you. You'll develop your gifts, and you'll achieve the being that you want to be, not the being everyone's portraying and protracting upon you. You will not be a helpless victim, a wounded sailor, but you will be a conqueror. And you will fly into the heavens and soar. And you'll know who you are. And you'll have eternal life. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and leave it right there, friends. I hope you guys have a really great day. We'll see you again tomorrow. Have a good one.